Hey guys, in this video we're going to be checking out the iRangeX IR8M radio, and this is a universal radio based on the Deviation TX firmware. Very similar to the way the Jumper T8SG works. This is what I've been using as my daily driver lately. It also uses the Deviation TX firmware. Interestingly enough, the version of the firmware that's on the Jumper is actually slightly newer than the one that's on the iRangeX, and I'm not sure why that is. I'll turn this on here, I'll show you the version. It's 2017 919, and the one that's on the Jumper is actually dated in October. Not exactly sure why that is. It's kind of strange, but it's probably easy to firmware upgrade this guy to a newer version if you want to. I think the newer version is, I think it came out in December, so I'm not sure why they didn't put the latest version on here. Should be able to easily do a firmware upgrade using the USB port here on the bottom. Now, I've had some strange issues with this guy, and I'll go over that here in a second. But let me just go over quickly all the sort of the basics of the radio, and then I'll go over sort of the problems that I had. Sort of this I guess game control style form factor here. It reminds me a lot of the Turnigy Evolution, but this is much bigger and heavier than the Turnigy Evolution. It weighs about 500 grams with the 4 AA batteries that are in the back here, and they go into this little tray. There is a little connector back here. You could use a 2S LiPo if you want to use that instead of the battery tray. In terms of all your switches here, you've got two position switches up here on the upper left and right. The two center longer sticks here are going to be 3 position switches. The 2 switches here on the shoulder are 2 position switches, and then you have 2 dials. The gimbals here are okay. They are very similar to the gimbals that are on the FlySky radio, the FSI6, and if you can see them side by side here, they're pretty similar, but the ones on the iRange radio are quite a bit looser. You could possibly open up the radio and tighten up the gimbals if you want to, but they're very loose. And the other problem that I had with the gimbals is that they don't center properly. So if you say, for example, you move the stick and then you let it go, it doesn't center to 1500 on either pitch or roll, yaw or throttle. And the when you leave it neutral, the center seems to drift around, and it's actually a very wide margin. So it would go from, say, 1470 to up to 1530, so a plus minus 30 around the 1500. So what would happen when you're flying this around is that even though you're not moving the sticks around, your quad is drifting around all over the place, and that's pretty much unacceptable for a transmitter. You can't have that much play in the gimbals where the center is just drifting around and giving input to your quad when you're not giving input to it. So that's a big problem for this one. I don't know if it's just because I have an early review unit and there's perhaps some sort of a bug in there. I did try and recalibrate and recenter the sticks using the software on the radio. That did not help. I did that a number of times. The drift in the gimbals is just completely unacceptable, and I find that because of that, this radio is pretty much unusable for me. So I won't be switching to this radio from the Jumper if you guys are asking me about that. Now, navigation for the menu here for the software. If you're familiar with Deviation TX, it's exactly the same. Same menus that are on the Jumper and any other radio that has Deviation TX software in it. You have the enter button here, exit button here, up, down, left, right buttons are on the side over here, which kind of makes navigation a little bit frustrating because you're most people are used to sort of like a 4-button dial here, where up, down, left, right are on a more like on the Jumper radio right here, designed like this, and it's not. So it's a little frustrating. You got the trim buttons here for your sticks on the bottom here. It all works fine. It's just that the biggest problem is the gimbals. Without it centering properly, I just find the radio is not very useful. Now, again, back onto the software. As I mentioned before, it does use the Deviation software. So I'm not going to talk about how deviation works. There's plenty of videos out there that explains how to set up your models and everything in deviation. It all works exactly the same way, so there's no point in regurgitating that. You can look up videos about how deviation works and set up your models that way. It works exactly the same way. Now I know a lot of you are going to ask about the range of the radio, and I can tell you here that there's no external antennas. You can see that all the antennas are internal. Didn't take this apart to see what kind of diversity antennas there were, if any, like there are, say, on the FlySky radio. I'm assuming it probably has some sort of a similar setup there, and I don't know if there's any way to add on an external antenna. But in terms of the range, I didn't have any problems with the range in terms of the usual places I fly, local parks and stuff like that. I don't fly normally very far anyway, beyond 200 meters, so I would say that if you are a park flyer like I am, this radio will be just fine in terms of range. It's just that as I mentioned before, I can't use this radio because the gimbals are pretty much useless for me. Anyway guys, so the bottom line is I'm kind of disappointed in this product. I was really anticipating this to be pretty useful. Turns out it's not. Now it may just be that my particular unit is a dud and doesn't work. I would check some other reviews if you're really interested in this product and want to use this as your universal radio to replace your FreeSky, FlySky, etc., etc. It does, obviously, it does work on all the protocols. I did test the FlySky, FreeSky, and Spectrum. They all worked on this radio just like they do on the Jumper. So in terms of functionality, that's fine. It's just that unless there's a way to replace the gimbal, it's just not very useful for me. Anyway guys, that's going to do it for my review. Again, I do encourage you to check out some other reviews. Hopefully the other people had better luck than I did, and we'll see. I'm actually looking forward to seeing if anyone else has some other review videos. I haven't seen any of them myself, and maybe we'll see if this problem is just limited to myself, or maybe it's a problem with the product itself. I'm not exactly sure. So I guess we'll look at some other reviews, and hopefully that'll determine what the state of this product is. And if you have any other questions for me, let me know, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.